What happens when Hollywood royalty meets late-night television and everything goes spectacularly wrong? Tonight we're diving into one of the most shocking moments in talk show history, when a guest's behavior became so outrageous that even the most professional host in the business had to take drastic action. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity interviews gone wrong. Stephen. Colbert adjusted his tie and glanced at his notes one final time as the commercial break wound down. The Late Show's studio audience buzzed with anticipation, knowing they were about to witness what was being billed as one of the most anticipated interviews of the year. Across from his desk sat Meghan Markle, impeccably dressed and wearing what appeared to be a confident smile, though Stephen's years of experience had taught him to read between the lines of celebrity composure. "We're back in 30 seconds, the floor manager called out, and Stephen felt that familiar pre-interview energy that had carried him through thousands of conversations with everyone from politicians to pop stars. Tonight felt different, though. There was an electric tension in the air that he couldn't quite place his finger on. "So, Meghan, we'll start with your recent projects and then move into some of the more personal topics. Sound good?" Stephen asked, his voice carrying that warm professionalism that had made him America's favorite late-night host. Meghan's response was clipped, almost dismissive. "I think we should focus on what really matters, Stephen. People need to hear the truth about what I've been dealing with." Stephen raised an eyebrow but maintained his composure. This wasn't unusual. Guests often had their own agendas, and part of his job was navigating those waters while keeping the audience entertained. "Of course, we'll get to everything that's important to discuss." The floor manager began his countdown, and suddenly they were live. Stephen's demeanor shifted seamlessly into his television persona, that perfect blend of wit and warmth that had earned him millions of devoted viewers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Meghan Markle," Stephen announced as the audience erupted in applause. Meghan waved graciously, but Stephen noticed something in her posture that seemed more rigid than relaxed. "Meghan, thank you so much for being here tonight. I have to say, you look absolutely radiant," Stephen began, employing his signature charm that usually put even the most nervous guests at ease. "Thank you, Stephen, though I have to say that's exactly the kind of superficial comment that women in the public eye are constantly subjected to," Meghan replied, her tone sharper than anyone in the audience expected. Stephen blinked, momentarily caught off guard, but his years of improvisation training kicked in immediately. "You're absolutely right. That was thoughtless of me. Let's talk about your work then. Your recent advocacy projects have been getting quite a bit of attention." "Finally, something substantive," Meghan said, though her tone suggested this was more of a criticism than appreciation. "Stephen, I came here tonight because your show has a platform, and platforms come with responsibility. I need to address the systematic campaign of harassment and lies that has been waged against me." Stephen nodded thoughtfully, sensing they were diving deeper than he had initially planned. "That sounds incredibly difficult to deal with. Can you tell us more about what you've been experiencing?" "What I've been experiencing, Stephen, is nothing short of a coordinated attack designed to silence a woman who dares to speak truth to power. The media, the establishment, even people who claim to support women's rights, they've all participated in this character assassination." The audience was completely silent now, the usual energy of a late-night talk show replaced by something much more intense. Stephen felt the weight of the moment, knowing that his next words would either steer this conversation back toward something productive or potentially escalate whatever was building here. "I can only imagine how frustrating that must be," Stephen said carefully. "But I think our audience would love to hear about the positive work you're doing, the causes you're championing." Meghan's laugh was sharp, almost bitter. "Positive work? Stephen, do you realize how condescending that sounds? You're trying to redirect me away from discussing the very real persecution I've faced, and toward some sanitized version of my story that makes everyone comfortable." Stephen felt the first real stirring of concern. In all his years of hosting, he had developed an instinct for when interviews were about to go sideways, and every alarm bell in his head was starting to ring. The audience was growing restless. He could feel their discomfort, and he knew he needed to regain control of the conversation. "Meghan, I'm not trying to redirect you at all. I want you to tell your story in whatever way feels authentic to you. But I also want to make sure we're having a conversation that serves everyone watching at home." Serves everyone? Or serves the same power structures that have been trying to destroy me? Meghan's voice was rising now, and Stephen could see his producers in the wings making subtle hand gestures, clearly concerned about where this was heading. Stephen took a deep breath, drawing on every ounce of his professional experience to navigate what was clearly becoming a volatile situation. "Meghan, I think there might be a misunderstanding here. I genuinely want to hear your perspective, but I also have a responsibility to my audience to keep our conversation constructive." Constructive? Meghan's voice had taken on an edge that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Stephen, what's constructive is finally having someone with a platform acknowledge the coordinated campaign against me. What's constructive is calling out the hypocrisy and the lies." Stephen could see his stage manager making increasingly frantic gestures from the wings, but he pressed on, hoping to salvage what was rapidly becoming one of the most uncomfortable interviews of his career. "I absolutely want to acknowledge your experiences, but help me understand specifically what you'd like people to know." "What I'd like people to know," Meghan said, her composure finally beginning to crack, "is that I have been systematically targeted by people who cannot stand to see a strong woman, a woman of color, speaking her truth. And now you're sitting here, trying to manage me, trying to control the narrative just like everyone else." The accusation hung in the air like a physical weight. Stephen felt his jaw tighten slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Meghan, I'm not trying to manage or control anything. I'm trying to have a conversation that respects both your experiences and my audience's intelligence." "Your audience's intelligence?" Meghan's laugh was becoming more shrill. "Your audience deserves to hear the truth, Stephen, not some watered-down version that protects the very institutions that have been complicit in my persecution." Stephen glanced quickly at the audience, noting the expressions of confusion and growing discomfort on their faces. These were people who had come for entertainment, for insight, for the kind of thoughtful discourse his show was known for. Instead, they were witnessing something that felt more like a public breakdown than an interview. "Meghan, I respect your passion about these issues, but I think we need to take a step back here," Stephen said, his tone becoming more firm while still maintaining his characteristic warmth. "Let's talk about solutions, about moving forward constructively." "There you go again with that word constructive," Meghan snapped, her voice rising to a level that was clearly making everyone in the studio uncomfortable. "You know what's not constructive, Stephen? Tone policing. You know what's not constructive? Trying to silence someone who's been through hell." Stephen felt something shift inside him. He had been patient, he had been professional, he had tried every technique in his considerable arsenal to redirect this conversation toward something productive. But Meghan's increasingly aggressive tone and her apparent determination to turn his show into a platform for what was beginning to feel like a personal vendetta was testing even his legendary composure. "Meghan, I need to be clear about something," Stephen said, his voice taking on a gravity that regular viewers would recognize as a signal that he was about to deliver one of his more serious moments. "I am not trying to silence you. I have never tried to silence you. But I am trying to facilitate a conversation that serves everyone, including you." "Serves everyone?" Meghan's voice was now loud enough that the studio microphones were picking up slight distortion. "Stephen, do you have any idea what it's like to have your entire life scrutinized, dissected, lied about? Do you have any concept of what it means to be a woman trying to maintain her dignity while the entire world seems determined to tear you down?" The audience was dead silent now, but it wasn't the engaged silence of people following a compelling conversation. It was the uncomfortable silence of people witnessing something they weren't sure they should be seeing. Stephen could feel the energy in the room shifting, could sense that his viewers at home were probably reaching for their remote controls. "I can't pretend to understand exactly what you've been through," Stephen said carefully. "But I do understand that pain and frustration can make us say things we might not mean. Maybe we should take a breath here." "Don't you dare patronize me." Meghan's response was swift and sharp. "Don't you dare suggest that my legitimate anger about genuine injustices is somehow inappropriate or something I need to apologize for." Stephen felt his patience finally beginning to fray. "Meghan, I'm not asking you to apologize for your feelings. I'm asking you to have a conversation that doesn't involve attacking me for trying to do my job." "Your job?" Meghan's voice was reaching a pitch that was genuinely uncomfortable to listen to. "Your job is to give people a platform to tell their stories, not to police how they tell them. Your job is to support people who have been marginalized, not to protect the very systems that marginalized them." Stephen looked directly into the camera, a move that experienced late-night viewers knew meant he was about to address something serious. "Folks, I think we need to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back." As the cameras stopped rolling, Stephen turned to Meghan with a look of genuine concern mixed with growing frustration. "Meghan, what is happening here? This isn't the conversation we discussed, and it's certainly not serving anyone well." "What's happening, Stephen, is that you're showing your true colors," Meghan replied, her voice still elevated despite the fact that they were no longer broadcasting. "You're showing that when push comes to shove, you're just another person who wants to control the narrative." Stephen felt a surge of anger that he had to work hard to suppress. "Meghan, I have been nothing but respectful to you. I have given you every opportunity to share your perspective, but you seem determined to turn this into some kind of confrontation that serves no one." The commercial break felt like an eternity, but it gave Stephen a moment to collect himself and make a decision that would define not just this interview, but potentially his entire approach to handling difficult guests going forward. When the cameras rolled again, his expression was more serious than his audience had seen in months. "We're back with Meghan Markle, and I think we need to address what just happened," Stephen said, looking directly at his guest with a combination of professionalism and barely contained frustration. "Meghan, I've been doing this job for a long time, and I pride myself on creating a space where guests can share their stories authentically. But that requires mutual respect." Meghan's response was immediate and combative. "Mutual respect? Stephen, you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to silence me, trying to force me into discussing only the topics that make you comfortable. That's not respect, that's control." Stephen felt something snap inside him. Years of training, years of maintaining composure under pressure, years of treating even the most difficult guests with dignity, all of it was being tested by someone who seemed determined to paint him as the villain in her personal drama. "Meghan, I need to stop you right there," Stephen said, his voice carrying an authority that made the entire studio fall silent. "I have not tried to silence you. I have not tried to control you. I have tried to facilitate a conversation that serves both you and the people watching at home. But what you're doing right now isn't conversation. It's accusation and attack." "Attack?" Meghan's voice reached a new octave. "Stephen, I am a woman who has been attacked by the media, attacked by institutions, attacked by people who claim to support women's rights. And now you're sitting here, on your platform, trying to make me the problem." Stephen stood up from his desk, something that longtime viewers knew was unprecedented during an interview. The action was so unexpected that even Meghan momentarily stopped talking, clearly caught off guard by this departure from talk show protocol. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stephen said, addressing his audience directly while Meghan sat in stunned silence, "in 20 years of doing television, I have never had to do what I'm about to do. I have interviewed politicians I disagree with, celebrities having public meltdowns, and people going through the worst moments of their lives. I have always tried to treat every guest with dignity and respect, even when they didn't extend the same courtesy to me. The studio was so quiet that the hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Meghan finally found her voice, but it was quieter now, perhaps finally recognizing that she had pushed things too far. "Stephen, you can't just decide to end an interview because you don't like what someone is saying." Stephen turned to look at her, and his expression was one of genuine sadness mixed with firm resolve. "Meghan, I'm not ending this interview because I don't like what you're saying. I'm ending it because you've made it impossible to have the kind of respectful dialogue that this show is built on. You've accused me of trying to silence you while I've given you a platform. You've accused me of trying to control you while I've asked only that we have a constructive conversation." "But Stephen," Meghan started, her voice now taking on a slightly desperate quality as she seemed to realize that her behavior had consequences. "People need to hear about what I've been through. They need to understand the persecution I've faced." Stephen sat back down, but his posture remained formal, professional in a way that created clear distance between himself and his guest. "Meghan, people do need to hear stories about injustice. They need to understand when people are treated unfairly. But they also deserve to hear those stories told in a way that doesn't involve attacking the very people trying to help you tell them." "I wasn't attacking you. I was defending myself," Meghan said, but her voice lacked the conviction it had carried earlier in the interview. "Defending yourself by accusing me of trying to silence you. Defending yourself by suggesting that my attempts to facilitate a productive conversation were actually attempts to control you? Meghan, that's not defense, that's offense, and it's unfair to me and to everyone watching." The audience began to murmur, a low buzz of conversation that indicated they were processing what they had just witnessed. Stephen could see his producers, in the wings, clearly unsure of how to handle this unprecedented situation. "I think what our viewers have witnessed tonight," Stephen continued, "is exactly the kind of behavior that makes productive dialogue about important issues so difficult. When someone is so focused on being a victim that they can't recognize when people are genuinely trying to help them, it becomes impossible to move forward constructively." Meghan's face flushed, and for a moment it looked like she might launch into another tirade. But something in Stephen's demeanor seemed to finally communicate that this was not a battle she was going to win. "I think it would be best," Stephen said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of handling live television, "if we ended tonight's interview here. Meghan, I genuinely hope you find the peace and the platform you're looking for, but it's clear that it's not going to happen in this format, on this night." Meghan sat in stunned silence for a moment, seemingly unable to believe that she was actually being dismissed from one of the most prestigious platforms in late-night television. "Stephen, you can't just kick me off your show because you don't like my passion." "I'm not kicking you off because of your passion, Meghan. I'm ending this interview because passion without respect for others isn't productive. It's destructive. And I won't let my show become a platform for destruction, even when it's dressed up as truth-telling." As security quietly approached to escort Meghan from the stage, Stephen turned to face his audience one final time. "Folks, I apologize that you had to witness that. Sometimes television doesn't go according to plan, and tonight was one of those nights. But I hope what you saw was an example of how important it is to maintain standards of respect and dignity, even when discussing the most difficult topics." The cameras faded to black as Meghan was quietly escorted from the studio, leaving Stephen alone at his desk with an audience that had just witnessed television history, though perhaps not the kind anyone had hoped for. That's a wrap on tonight's incredible story. What do you think about how Stephen Colbert handled this situation? Should hosts take a firmer stand when interviews go off the rails? Or should they let guests say whatever they want regardless of how it affects the conversation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories from the world of entertainment.